He's been called Captain Catholic by some, the Mad Monk by others. He's a family man, a Rhodes Scholar, a former journalist and a former seminarian. He's completed the gruelling Ironman race, which was probably a walk in the park compared to the election that he's just won. He is, of course, Tony Abbott, Australia's new Prime Minister. So what does his election mean for Australia, and what does it mean for us? Dr. Jennifer Curtin is Associate Professor of Political Studies at the University of Auckland, and she's our guest on today's End Zone Now. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for sparing time for us today. It was an interesting election to watch, but it felt more that Kevin Rudd had lost rather than Tony Abbott had won.
That seems to be the general analysis. I noticed that Bob Hawke was also saying that on election night. I think the reason why people are saying that is because there was a real hope, especially amongst Labor supporters, that Rudd taking the leadership from Gillard would give them a sufficient fillip in the polls that they would be able to at least stem the tide and not lose any seats. And if they didn't lose any seats, even if they didn't win any, they might be in the same position again to be able to negotiate with some independents or hopefully win back a few seats in Queensland. But
in the end, it seemed almost that the fact that they had swapped from Kevin Rudd to Julia Gillard and then back again from Julia Gillard to Kevin Rudd, that seemed to put some voters off. They seemed like they couldn't make their minds up.
Absolutely. I think there's two factors. One is that leadership, swip-swap that was going on, that was really, voters were getting very tired of the fact that Labor couldn't really make up its mind. But the second thing I think is that the polls really drove a lot of that. So while Rudd won very well in 2007, his honeymoon period didn't last very long, and 6 months out from 2010 it looked like he was going to lose very badly as well. So of course they went to Gillard, and Gillard was really never accepted in the same way that Rudd was by some people who were Labor voters, and so she was always going to face an uphill battle.
I mean, she came in for some fairly rough treatment at the hands of Tony Abbott, but as a political analyst, what was your take on Julia Gillard? Because to a dispassionate observer, she seemed actually to be doing a half-decent job.
Well, that's the thing. I think the troubles with the leadership meant that they overshadowed a lot of the policy achievements of both Rudd and Gillard. So I would say that, from a woman's perspective, yes, she did cop a lot of stuff that perhaps male politicians don't have to deal with, and being called a witch while you're a Prime Minister is quite unusual, I would say, and very undiplomatic on the part of protesters. But on the other hand, she did do a reasonable job, like holding a coalition government, a minority government with independents from the Greens, an independent from Tasmania, plus a couple of rural independents is no easy task, but she managed to do really, solid government during that period. So yes, she did do not a bad job. Maybe history will be kind to her. I'm not sure anybody's going to be kind to her right now.
The interesting thing is that Australia has been through the same recession that we've all been through, and has come through really up until the last few months, has come through very strongly and has been almost unaffected by the recession, certainly done much better than other OECD countries, and that has been pretty much all under Labor's control. So it's almost like people are just fed up with Labor, they just want to get rid of them.
Yes, so I mean, Rudd did make a decision to take a different policy track on the economic front compared to, say, Cameron, where he pursued a stimulus type package rather than an austerity package. And China was doing the same thing. Plus they had the mineral, the mining boom going on. And in some respects, that relationship, the trading relationship that we have with both China and Australia, our economy was protected because both our two major trading partners were pursuing stimulus packages that kept their economies ticking over. Now, conservative economists would say that's not a good look because the debt blows out and the deficit's doesn't look good, but it certainly held Australia together for a large part of the GFC.
So let's talk about Tony Abbott. What an interesting man. Unelectable, said some. Obviously not.
Well, he was considered unelectable, 4 or 5 years ago, and he did lose in 2010, but not by much, obviously, and that gave the Liberals some heart that he'd been able to claw back such a significant lead that Rudd had against Gillard. So his popularity will never be as high as Keys, say, here in New Zealand. He doesn't have that same appeal. But what was really interesting during the campaign was it was almost like the more people got to see Rudd, the more they were reminded about why they didn't really like him the first time he was leader, but the more they got to see Abbott in the debating forums and so on, the more they came to kind of see him as, okay, he could do this job. So yes, his appeal has grown slowly, but he's done a really good job winning this for them, and so that will hold Malcolm Turnbull at bay from challenging the real leadership for a little while, and actually probably it lines up Joe Hockey as a possible, next in line to compete against Turnbull whenever they decide they want.
Because Abbott's policies will be quite interesting, because he comes from a very strong Catholic background, and that seems to be informing a lot of the decisions that he's taking.
I'm not sure how much his Catholicism directly is affecting the policy choices that he's making. I mean, what we have to remember about his close colleagues, so Joe Hockey, Christopher Pyne and a couple of the others, is they're all actually Jesuit-educated Catholic men. So they all have a sort of a sense of family values, that education is important, that social justice is as important as social conservatism. So he's not doing this alone. He's surrounded by kind of moderate, like-minded, soon-to-be cabinet ministers who will ensure that there are some elements that are fiscally conservative, if you like, to rein in some of the debt, but on some social issues he will be very supportive of family values and mothers who want to stay at home with their children and that sort of thing.
Because he's already talking about extending paid parental leave to 26 weeks,
yes,
and up to salaries of $150,000 a year plus superannuation. I mean, that seems very generous.
Well, it is very generous, and it doesn't appeal to a lot of the Labour side of politics because it doesn't seem to be sufficiently means-tested in terms of giving money to those who actually need it. The idea is a good one. Paid parental leave is an important policy platform, but the general consensus is that actually he won't be able to go ahead with it, that it's too expensive in the current climate, and that once the Treasury opens its books properly, he's going to have to rein some of that back in.
Boat people is, of course, the other issue that he seems to be striking a public nerve with, in that he says he's going to stop them. He's going to have Australian naval vessels in Indonesian waters, turning the boats around before they get as far as Australian waters. I mean, is he just courting a vote there, or is he really going to be able to do that?
Well, I think the voters at times do get very worried about asylum seekers coming on boats. There's no doubt about it. Okay, in the election it was ranked about 10th on the issue, but when a new boat comes, people do worry about it. He's going to have some problems, though, with managing Indonesia and then sending the Navy into Indonesian waters and trying to buy these boats and all the things that he's saying he will do. And plus, it could be very expensive. So again, I think that's one of those other issues where he's going to have to do some serious costings. But there's no doubt that he will be firm on asylum seekers who decide to come by boats.
And then there's the matter of global warming, carbon tax, emission trading, all this. He is on record as saying he doesn't have much faith in the science behind global warming, climate change. What will that mean? Because they've already embarked on an emission trading scheme a bit like ours. So what will this mean? So
what he's proposed is what he's calling a direct action approach. And so here what he's going to do is use taxpayers' subsidies to encourage businesses to self-regulate and reduce pollution beyond what's expected of them anyway. So a sort of a self-regulation with a little bit of a financial incentive. He's closing down the various commissions and agencies that used to monitor climate change, so he's going to save money there, and he's going to wipe the carbon tax in probably the first couple of weeks that he's in government. So he hasn't highlighted the fact that he's a skeptic, but he's certainly not as wedded to the issue of climate change as, say, Kevin Rudd was.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that he's talked about already is reducing aid, particularly to the Pacific, to the tune of $4.5 billion less aid for the Pacific. Now, I've seen Tier Fund today has put out a press release saying that they're concerned that New Zealand will end up trying to make up that shortfall because the money is desperately needed in the Pacific. That would seem to be something that isn't a particularly neighbourly thing to do.
No, and it's very interesting coming on the back of the Pacific Island Forum when those small nations were quite clear that climate change was a real issue for them, and they were needing us, New Zealand and Australia, to sort of set some best practice standards on this. So I think it is disappointing on the climate change issue, but also the foreign aid. So my imagining, speculating, would be that he may, once he gets in government, decide to have another look at this, because it's not getting a lot of good press, and really it's not going to save them huge amounts of money. It makes them look really negative, and he wants to develop really good relationships with Asia and the Pacific, and foreign policy is an important part of his role as a Prime Minister, even if he doesn't have that portfolio. So that might be one he takes another look at. It might have been a bit more of a populist platform rather than a real one.
Because it was interesting to see what they say before the election and what happens after the election.
Absolutely.
Because he is an interesting bloke. As we said, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's an Iron Man. I saw one paper today referred to him as a fitness fanatic. He was out on a bike in the early hours of this morning. Very much a family man. He's married to a Kiwi. That's, I wouldn't say unusual in politics, but it's certainly, he wears his normality on his sleeve.
Yeah, I think he does come across, and he will increasingly come across, as a fairly regular guy to the people who don't feel that they know him as a Prime Minister or as a leader to date. And he's been a politician, though, for more than 19 years now. So even though he's done all these other things, he's actually the commensurate political animal as well. So I think we'll see a balancing of that normality with the demands of leadership. And Helen Clark and John Howard, with his yellow tracksuit, have all demonstrated the importance of staying fit while you're in such a demanding job. So I'm sure we'll see him out there in his, lycra, doing a bit more over the course of the next 3 years. And it'll be a challenge for the journalists to keep up with him. Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for your time. It's great to get your insight. Thank you. You're welcome. And that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you for watching. This week on End Zone Focus, our special guest is Archbishop William Brown Ture, who'll be talking to Mania Clark about the impact of the gospel when it first reached this country nearly 200 years ago. But for now, from the End Zone Now team, ka kite ana.